Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast. I am your host, Sarah, and I am excited to be joining you again today to talk about one of my favorite subjects, which is, of course, books. And this week I'll be talking about another one of my favorite authors from childhood, and that is the author E.L. Konigsburg. And I started reading E.L. Konigsburg when I'm not sure how old I was. As I've mentioned before, I come from a family of avid readers, and my dad's a librarian, and my mom loves to read, and so they were always finding books, coming across books, researching books, just finding books that they thought would be interesting for us, for my siblings and I to read, and E.L. Konigsburg was one of those authors. And the first book that I read by her is a book called From the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankweiler, and we're going to be talking about that book first, but it actually came up recently because someone posted on Facebook a link to an article with the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. And if you've read this particular book, you know that that is where it takes place. And so I was looking at this article, and I'm going to talk more about that a little bit later. And it reminded me just how much I loved this book and how much I loved other books by this same author. And so I thought, this is an author that I want to talk about on the podcast, and I, want to share my love for this author and for these books. She has a quirky sense of humor. She's got interesting storylines that aren't necessarily like other storylines that you might find in books. So that's always fun. I always appreciate when you get a story that really sticks with you. You remember parts because, they are unusual or they really spoke to you in some way. And her books were that way for me. So as I said, the first book that I want to talk about is From the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankweiler. And actually, this is the 50th anniversary of this book, and that is one of the reasons that this video was posted, is because they are having in July, I believe, events at the Met involving tours about, travel. There are places in the Met that are mentioned in this book, and you can take these tours, family tours, through the Met to visit the places that the children explore in this book. So there is this article and there's this video of a 10-year-old Abby and one of the museum workers who has worked there for 31 years, and they're both talking about their love of the book and the events that take place in the book and the things that they love about the Met. And so here is the description from Amazon of this book. It says, when suburban Claudia Kincaid decides to run away, she knows she doesn't just want to run from somewhere. She wants to run to somewhere, to a place that is comfortable, beautiful, and preferably elegant. She chooses the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. Knowing that her younger brother Jamie has money and thus can help with her a serious cash flow problem, she invites him along. Once settled into the museum, Claudia and Jamie find themselves caught up in the mystery of an angel statue that the museum purchased at auction for a bargain price of $225. The statue is possibly an early work of the Renaissance master Michelangelo, and therefore worth millions. Is it, or isn't it? Claudia is determined to find out. Her quest leads her to Mrs. Basil E. Frankweiler, the remarkable old woman who sold the statue, and to some equally remarkable discoveries about herself. So here you have it. It's a mystery. It starts out as two children who are running away, and as a kid that seemed really exciting to me. And they run away and they go and they live in this museum. They hide out in the bathrooms and they figure out all the ways to get around security, which is probably a little bit easier in 1967 without all the digital security we have now. But they figure out this whole routine for how they're going to live in the museum and where they're going to find food and how they're going to use their money. And they sleep in this, amazing antique old bed, and they hide their stuff in certain parts of the museum. And it just seemed like this really exciting adventure. Although I was really scared of the dark as a kid, so I can't imagine being alone in a giant museum. I think that would have scared me a lot. But that's what I loved about this story, was this adventure, right? Kids who are kind of my age, who are in New York. They've run away to this amazing museum and they're having this amazing adventure, which leads to them trying to solve a mystery. And this book it's listed as for age level 8 to 12, for grade level 3 through 7. So kind of a good variety of ages there for your kids. And you of course know your kids best and know what reading level they're at. Or if you read as a family, you'll know what level of comprehension and level of story that they enjoy hearing or reading on their own. And as I said, this starts out as kind of an adventure and then moves into a mystery. Now that I am older and I think about my nieces and other important children in my life, and I think of it from the parental standpoint, and I think, oh my gosh, these two children just ran away to New York City. Their parents must be flipping out. So I read it recently again as an adult, and I read it from a slightly different perspective as I was thinking about their parents, and oh my goodness, that's just horrible, right? I read somewhere that E.L. Konigsburg she wrote this story thinking about her own children, and that if they were to ever run away, they would have to run away to someplace, that they wouldn't want to run away and, rough it. They wouldn't want to be those kids who took their backpack and went out into the woods. No, they would need to run away somewhere where they could live in the style that they were accustomed to. And so that's how this book started, that Claudia doesn't want to run away from somewhere. She wants to run to somewhere, and she decides that this elegant, beautiful place that she's visited is the perfect place for her to run away to. And I actually went to the Met a few years ago. More than a few years ago now. It's been about 10 years ago now. And it was amazing, but it was also Thanksgiving weekend, and I am not a big fan of crowds, and there were so many people in there. So I didn't spend much time in the Met. I was very disappointed in that. I just couldn't quite deal with all of the people that were in there on the day that we went. And it was just a timing issue. I would love to go back. I would really love to go back. And if I were able to go in July, I think it would be a lot of fun to go and do some of those tours that they're having. At any rate, I also read that E.L. Konigsburg wrote often when her children were in school. She started writing after her children started school, and she would write, and then when they would come home, she would read what they wrote. She would read to them what she had written that day, and if they laughed or they enjoyed it, she would keep it. If not, she would try again. So I love that this is really personal, that she was writing for her children, and she, in this case, was kind of writing about her children a little bit in terms of her inspiration for this story. And as I said, I love the adventure of this story. I love the mystery of this story. It's fun to watch the children as they move through this adventure into more of a journey of self-discovery. As they try to solve the mystery, they start learning more about themselves, especially Claudia, of course, because she is the main character. Her younger brother Jamie provides he provides the cash, of course, for their adventure, and they also get cash. They take change out of the fountain where people throw their change. They also bathe in the fountain, which is hilarious that they are in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, this place of just amazing works of art, and there are these two children who are bathing in the fountain at night when nobody else is around, and they're sleeping in this amazing antique bed, 4-poster bed, and all of these things. And one of the fun parts about that video was that 10-year-old Abby, who's in the video, goes around with the woman who works in the museum, and they find places that are mentioned in the books, whether it's an actual specific place or if it's something very similar to what's mentioned in the book. And another cool thing about the book is that E.L. Konigsburg does all the drawings. There's these wonderful pen and ink black and white drawings in the book that she drew from visiting the Met herself. So there's really incredible detail in these drawings. And this is just such a fun book. I can't speak highly enough of it. I do have to take our first break, but when we come back, I'll be talking more about E.L. Konigsburg, so stay tuned and I will be right back.
Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Welcome back to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast. This week I am talking about author E.L. Konigsburg. Specifically, before the break, I was talking about her book, From the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankweiler. It is the 50th anniversary of this classic, and as such, it was written in 1967, so there are definitely some different things about this book. Even when I read it as a child, and, it was not 50 years old then, but even as a child, first of all, I grew up in rural Montana, so New York seemed about the most exotic place that I could think of as a child. I didn't know, a lot of, this huge city. I couldn't quite even fathom it, even though I'd seen it in movies and on TV, but imagining being a kid and running away in this giant city. But so even during my childhood, I read it in the 80s sometime. I'm not sure exactly when. So it was about 20 years old at the time. Wow, that makes me feel old. But even then, there are things, they get their food out of vending machines, but I think they're called automats. Does that sound right? But there were a few things that I didn't fully understand, even though, it was much closer to when this book had been written, but still times had changed enough. And so, of course, there are, like I said, the security would be different now if they were to run away. If there was an updated version of it, they run away. There's no cell phones. There's when they are doing research, they're reading newspapers, they're doing those sorts of things when they go to visit Mrs. Basil E. Frankweiler and her mixed up files. She actually has files in file cabinets and those sorts of things. So it is fun to read it from that perspective, to see, these children who, of course, are going on this wonderful adventure, but going on this wonderful adventure in 1967 too. So to compare how that would be, that's always something when I read with my own family, how I like to say, how is this similar to what we are, how is this similar to our own lives, or how is this very different, or what part doesn't make sense to you, those sorts of things. Even especially money. So in the book description, it says that the museum purchased this piece of art that could be a Michelangelo for the bargain price of $225, which of course is a bargain price, but $225 in 1967 would have been still a bargain, but $225 would have been a lot more money, than it is now. So there's those sorts of things that they get their money again. As I said, they get the coins out of the fountain. So seeing what they can buy with the coins that they get out of the fountain, out of the vending machines, is fun, and it's fun to imagine, or to just compare those things to the way our lives are now. So I cannot recommend this book enough. I loved this book. I recommend it to you. I recommend it to you to read it as an adult, frankly, if you like to. If you read it as a child, go back and revisit it. If you didn't read it as a child, child, what the heck, go and read it and just have a short book, an easy read that's a fun adventure. But if you have children, I definitely recommend it for them. Children who are creative, children who are interested in art, children who are, adventurous in any way. I think they will really love this book, whether they read it on their own or whether you read it as a family. I highly recommend this book. So I do want to move on to another one of Tel Konigsburg's books, and I'm not sure that this one is as well known. It is called From Jericho Tel. And a quick aside, a quick note, we have 2 Chihuahuas in our family, and they are 3, they're brother and sister, and they are Chalupa Batman and Tallulah Cooper. My husband named Chalupa after a show called The League. If you watch the show, then I'm sure you know what I am talking about with the name Chalupa Batman. And I named the girl dog Tallulah Cooper, and partly because when we first got them and we hadn't named them yet, I was calling her my little trash compactor, because in the first half an hour after we got these dogs, she ate a leaf, or she tried to eat a leaf, a rock. She was a puppy, so she was exploring the world with her mouth, and she tried to eat so many different things in that first half an hour that we had them at home. So I was calling her my little trash compactor, and I wanted her initials to be TC after her first name, her first nickname of trash compactor. I wouldn't ever call her trash compactor as her real name. And Cooper comes from my niece she was 3 at the time, and her best friend was Cooper. And so middle name came from Cooper. But Tallulah is Tallulah Bankhead, not necessarily because of the actress, but because of this book, From Jericho Tel. And in this book, there are 2. So let me just read you the description. Jean Marie and Malcolm meet Tallulah, the ghost of a once famous actress, who sends them on a quest to find the Regina Stone, the diamond she wore until it was stolen when she died. But they soon find more than they bargained for. So once again, you have 2 children, a boy and a girl, and they find themselves on this adventure. This one's a little different because there are elements of paranormal, elements of fantasy. Anyway, they meet the ghost of Tallulah Bankhead, and I didn't know who this was. If you don't know who Tallulah Bankhead is, she was an actress in the 1920s, so probably not a lot of people know about her now. As a child, I didn't really know who she was. I loved the illustrations. Again, Tel Konigsburg does the illustrations in this book. I loved the drawings of Tallulah Bankhead because, she's wearing fabulous flapper gear when they meet her. And so this book is a little bit weird because they do meet a ghost, and she does send them on this quest. Instead of a mystery about a statue at a museum, they are now trying to find this necklace that was stolen from her in life. And I read this book. I loved this book as a kid, but I didn't remember a lot about it except for the Tallulah Bankhead part, which I think is really interesting. So back to my puppy story, when we got our dogs, I named my dog Tallulah because of this book. And so after that, I really wanted to go back and find it and see really what it was about, because all I could remember was that these 2 children somehow end up meeting Tallulah Bankhead, which is very, very strange when you think about it. And so there's one review, and I love the description of Tallulah. It says, Jean Marie and Malcolm are plummeted into the magic underground world of flamboyant, red-haired, cigarette-puffing Tallulah. Tallulah sets them a series of tasks, righting wrongs on Earth, including exposing a phony faith healer by exposing him in one of the book's funniest scenes, and making them invisible in order to perform these tasks. So the tasks lead in fine fairy tale fashion to the one big task, and then to the reward. In this case, realizing their talents and finding the courage to let them emerge. So again, you've got kind of the same elements, right? You've got 2 children again, not brother and sister this time, but they're two lonely children in the book, and they come together because they are lonely and they do need friends, and then they find each other, and then they find the ghost of Tallulah Bankhead. They find Tallulah, and she sets them on these tasks, and whether these tasks are selfish or not, she's setting them to find her necklace. They actually help the children to discover things about themselves, to cement their friendship, to lead them in ways that will help them to grow as characters, etc. So again, you've got adventure. Again, you've got a little bit of mystery. Again, you've got character development as their friendship forms, as their relationship grows, and as they learn about themselves, learn about each other, learn about what it means to be in relationship as friends, etc. So again, I loved this book. I would recommend it. The ages are similar to that of the Mixed Up Files. This one's a little bit older. This one says ages 10 through 14 and grade level 5 through 9. So a little bit older than the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankweiler. But as your children grow and mature a little bit, then this one might be next up on their reading list. We do have to take our second break of the podcast, but when we come back, we will be wrapping up this episode on author E.L. Konigsburg. So stay tuned, and I will be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast. We are talking in this episode about author E.L. Konigsburg, one of my favorite authors from childhood. And she did die in 2013, so 4 years ago. But according to her author page, she is the only author to have won the Newbery Medal and be runner-up in the same year. In 1968, from The Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankweiler, which was her first novel, won the Newbery Medal, and then her book Jennifer Hecate Macbeth, William McKinley and Me, Elizabeth, was named Newbery Honor Book. Almost 30 years later, she won the Newbery Medal once again for The View from Saturday. She has also written and illustrated 3 picture books: Samuel Todd's Book of Great Colors, Samuel Todd's Book of Great Inventions, and Amy Elizabeth Explores Bloomingdale's. In 2000, she wrote Silent to the Bone, which was named a New York Times notable book and an ALA Best Book for Young Adults, among many other honors. After completing her degree at Carnegie Mellon University, Ms. Konigsburg did graduate work in organic chemistry at the University of Pittsburgh. For several years, she taught science at a private girls' school. When the third of her 3 children started kindergarten, she began to write. So she was a chemist. She went to school, she was in STEM. She was in something that not a lot of women are in, but she also wrote. So she was both a scientist and someone who was creative, which I think influences her books in a lot of ways. So today I have talked about From the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankweiler, along with the book Up From Jericho Tel, which might not be everyone's first choice when they think about E.L. Konigsburg. I did also love Jennifer Hecate Macbeth, William McKinley and Me, Elizabeth, and that is again the runner-up. She won the award and was runner-up for the award. And there's another book that she wrote that I read as a child, A Proud Taste for Scarlet Scarlet and Miniver. I'm not sure how you pronounce that word. I remember reading that one as a kid. And this one also has some historical elements to it because it's about Eleanor of Aquitaine. Eleanor of Aquitaine has been waiting in heaven for a long time to be reunited with her second husband, Henry II of England. Finally, the day has come when Henry will be judged for admission, and while Eleanor waits, three people close to her during various times of her life join her, helping to distract her and providing a rich portrait of a remarkable woman in history. So if you are a family or if you have children who are interested in history, who like stories of kings and queens and those sorts of things, which I did as a child, I was fascinated by, kings and queens and royalty. I loved historical fiction. I may again have been a very strange child. I don't know, because all I have is my own childhood to think about. I loved books like that. And so A Proud Taste for Scarlet and Miniver is this book, and that has some historical fiction aspects to it. But again, you got a little bit of that paranormal, supernatural kind of stuff because it is, of course, as Eleanor of Aquitaine is in heaven waiting for her husband to join her. And so you get to learn a little bit about her life and some history and those sorts of things. And then the book that I mentioned a minute ago, Jennifer Hecate, Macbeth, William McKinley, and Me, Elizabeth. It's a very long title and it's a mouthful, but here is the description of that one. Elizabeth is an only child, new in town, and the shortest kid in her class. So you're recognizing some themes here, right? Children who go on adventures, children who maybe don't fit in, children who feel out of place in their lives, in their peer groups, in society, whatever. So Elizabeth is an only child, new in town, and the shortest kid in her class. She's also pretty lonely until she meets Jennifer. Jennifer is, different. She's read Macbeth. She never wears jeans or shorts. She never says please or thank you. And she says she is a witch. It's not always easy being friends with a witch, but it's never boring. At first, an apprentice and then a journeyman witch, Elizabeth learns to eat raw eggs and how to cast small spells. And she and Jennifer collaborate on cooking up an ointment that will enable them to fly. That's when a marvelous toad, Hilary Ezra, enters their lives. And that's when trouble starts to brew. I cannot recommend this author enough because of, just as I've said, I feel like I'm repeating myself over and over again in this episode, but it's stories about finding friendship. She writes stories about finding yourself, about figuring out where you fit in this world, even if you are a little bit different, about finding friends who appreciate you for you, about finding people in your lives who, even if you are a little bit different from the rest of the world, you can find those people who love and support you and go on adventures with you. And even, there's always a little bit of a quirky twist in these books, whether it's living in a museum after you've run away, whether it's being sent on quests by a dead actress from the 1920s, whether it is, a girl who says she's a witch, but who's read Macbeth. There are all of these wonderful things in these books. I cannot recommend E.L. Konigsburg to you enough. If you read them as an adult, I love them. I do. Read them to your children. Let your children read them. Go on these adventures with the children that are written about by E.L. Konigsburg, and hopefully you will love them as much as I do. So I want to thank you for joining me this week for my discussion, kind of my love letter to E.L. Konigsburg. I do. I love her. I will continue reading her. I will continue telling other people about her. But thank you so much for joining me this week as I discuss some of the books of author E.L. Konigsburg. I hope you will join me next week because I'm very excited. I have another author interview set up, and this one is with author Curtis C. Chen. He has written a book called Waypoint Kangaroo that came out last year, and he has another book coming out in a couple of weeks called Kangaroo 2. TOO. It's the second book in this series about kangaroo. They are science fiction. They are set in space. They are set in the future, and they are wonderful books. So I hope you'll join me when I chat with author Curtis C. Chen next week. In the meantime, you can find all of our podcasts at www.gsmcpodcast.com. You can download them on SoundCloud, iTunes, Stitcher, etc. Any of the apps that you use for any mobile devices, you can download our podcasts for those. You can follow us on social media. Please hit me up on social media. I know I say this every week, but I would love to hear from you. We can be found on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Tumblr, all of those lovely places that you may go visit with, your own social media accounts. So please come find me. Please interact with me. Leave your comments, etc. As I said, I would love to hear from you. In the meantime, I hope you have a wonderful week. And I hope that you go out and get yourself lost in a good book. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.